Hello everyone and welcome to another planning period with Teach This Teacher. I'm Wesley Lawson, an educator, teacher, and an academic coach here in the state of Georgia. I make these videos to help you get ready to plan your next lesson based on the standards. So I have my mango flavored seltzer water here and my sticky notes to remind me of what to talk about. So let's get to it. The first thing that the standard SS7H2 overview of it is that we're going to be talking about the history of the Middle East, and they broke it down into 4 elements: A, B, C, and D. Let's start with element A. This element is all about the Ottoman Empire being defeated after World War I and what happened to the city-states that were made after their defeat in World War I. So let students know that the Ottoman Empire basically controlled most of the land area in the Middle East prior to World War I. You might have some students not really understand what an empire is, but that's a very quick fix. Write it on the board. Empire equals the ownership of many different countries, peoples, etc., etc. Also, they need to understand that they studied World War I back in 6th grade, just a little bit, and to understand the Ottoman Empire fought on the losing side with Germany. So after that, the winners partitioned, which will be an important vocabulary word. What does it mean to partition? They partitioned the Middle East, and when they did that, they did not consider the differences between different religious groups and ethnic groups. So you are trying to get your students to understand that this led to the regional conflicts that we still have in the Middle East today. You can bring up maps. You can find maps. I'll try to find one and put it in the link down below. But you can find maps of how they partitioned it, where they said France would control this area and Britain would control this area, and they would leave this area independent, but it would still have French influence. So allow them to see that the Middle Eastern countries took this losing nation, the Ottoman Empire, after World War I, and the winners got to draw the lines, and they smashed a bunch of ethnic groups and religious groups together that had a lot of differences, and this led to conflict. Perhaps you can get them to think of a scenario where if they were forced to live in the same city with the biggest rivals, maybe Georgia fans and Alabama fans, all living in the city of Athens. All right, so this is just an idea. You can play around like that to get them to understand. You would have a lot of conflicts as well. Of course, students are going to have to know what the ethnic group and a religious group is to maybe fully understand this standard, but they should have also learned that in 6th grade as well. So that is pretty much element A. Element B says the establishment of the modern state of Israel in 1948. So basically, you're going to give students some background knowledge that Israel goes back into the BC era, but before their establishment, their first establishment, that the land belonged to the Palestinians, the Arabic people, Palestinians. Maybe you could activate some of their background knowledge by asking them if they know about Moses, this biblical story about Moses and the Red Sea and how they were searching for a particular land that they believe that God gave to them. And so now they have to understand that the Israel nation has lost that land, but in 1948, after the horrors of the Holocaust to the Jewish people, the winning countries decided to give Israel back to the Jewish people as kind of a safe haven and a refuge for their persecution and for the Holocaust that happened throughout Europe. So this did happen in 1948, and the element of this standard tells you to talk about the land, anti-Semitism, Zionism, and the Holocaust. So as far as the land goes, understand the religious connection to the land that both the Jewish people had to it, again, believing that God had promised it to them through their father, their patriarchal fathers. And then, of course, the Palestinians feel like it was their land, and they have religious connections to the land. So you're going to talk about Mecca and how important it is in Jerusalem, how important it is to both Muslims and Jewish people. The anti-Semitism is a good vocabulary word that it is very important to teach students because it's all in the news, it's in textbooks, it's a word that we should be familiar with. And so understanding that that is hatred and discrimination and violence towards the Jewish people. So we're going to talk about how that led to, with the Holocaust, how that led to the creation of Israel, because the winning countries, again, felt that it would be important to give them that safe space. Zionism is a movement or a philosophy that Jewish people would be better together, that the Jewish people have been scattered in many different nations as they choose to live in other places or forced to live in other places. But Zionism is the belief that they are better if they live together in one homeland. So this feeling, this philosophy, this thought led to the creation of Israel as well. And then the last part of the element mentions the Holocaust, which students should be pretty familiar with by this time in their school career. But of course, you're going to go over the basics of it and why it led to the establishment of the modern state of Israel. Moving on to element C, we are talking about more modern day conflicts over land and religion. And so help students to understand that there are many, many different conflicts. That old saying, I want peace in the Middle East, is a saying for a reason, because it is a region known for conflict, violence, and wars. So you're going to talk to them about three specific conflicts, but the first one being the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the second being the Sunni-Shia, and then the third being the Kurdish independence movement. So between the Palestinians and the Israelis, you should have already went over the geography of the Middle East. So students should be pretty familiar with where Israel is, where the West Bank is, and where the Gaza Strip. So you're going to help them to understand that when Israel was created in 1948, people already lived there. Therefore, conflict happened between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So help them to understand that Gaza Strip and the West Bank, more conflict happens there than anywhere, because that's where the majority of your Palestinians live, except the Israelis do exercise a lot of authority over them, and there's just a lot of conflict back and forth. Sunni Shia Muslim conflict, you're going to help them, students, to understand that they are both Muslim. They practice Islam, but they have different beliefs, and sometimes they fight over those beliefs. Basically, the conflict goes over the fact that they disagree with who the leader of the Muslims should be, and they have a lot of similarities, but they have a few differences also about the interpretation of their holy book, the Quran. So help them to understand what that conflict is about. And then lastly, the Kurds. The Kurds are an ethnic group that are scattered between a lot of different a lot of different countries in the Middle East, and they feel like that's not fair. They should have their own country, Kurdistan. There was a video on YouTube, not sure if it's there still, but if it is there, I'll put it in the link, called "Where is Kurdistan?" And the answer is, it doesn't exist. And why not? If all the other religious groups, like the Persians, got their own land in Iran, the Afghanis, if all these countries got their countries after World War II, why didn't the Kurds get theirs? That's how they feel. And they try to group together to fight for their independence. And that is pretty much the element C. We have element D. And element D is all about United States presence in the Middle East or Southwest Asia. So you're going to go over a few of the conflicts. I think it's 3 of them: the Persian Gulf War, the Afghanistan War, and Iraq War. So here's the basics of those. You basically want students to understand that the United States is involved in Middle Eastern conflicts for primarily 2 reasons. The first one, as seen in the Persian Gulf War, is over natural resources. The second reason is to combat what we believe to be terrorism and conditions that would make us unsafe. So let's go over that. The Persian Gulf War happened when Saddam Hussein, who led Iraq, led an invasion of Kuwait, and he basically seized their oil fields. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with the United States, you might think at first, until you realize that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait were some of our biggest sellers of oil. So set the stage for students, help them to understand that in the late 80s, early 90s, there was an oil shortage, or throughout the 80s with Jimmy Carter. I always put a fictitious tag number on the board, XAC243. And I would tell students, because this tag number on this car tag ended in an odd number, you are only able to get gas on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And even number cars are able to get gas on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays or whatever. So I'm trying to get them to see how bad the oil shortage was. So the United States intervened in that war, in the Persian Gulf War, and tell them that people would wait in line for a very long time, hours for gas, and then when they got to the pump, it wasn't there. So help them understand that we intervened in that war for our own self-interest, for that oil and gas, and to liberate Kuwait and to defend Saudi Arabia so that we can continue to purchase their oil. Our second conflict, the Afghanistan War, was to capture Osama bin Laden, who masterminded the 9/11 conflicts, which students, again, by 7th grade should be pretty familiar with. Please read to them for this standard The Man in the Red Bandana, which is a very emotional color picture book that really just encapsulates the emotional devastation, just a horrid attack on that day of 9/11 when the World Trade Centers, the Pentagon, and other sites were attacked. So they're going to understand that war was waged to capture and kill Osama bin Laden and his terrorist group for that attack. And then please separate the Iraq War from the Afghanistan War. I think in our culture, in our media, we purposely or incidentally combined the Iraq and Afghanistan War because they overlapped, but they were not. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, and I think too many students and too many people are taught that they were together. Iraq, the reasoning for the invasion of Iraq by the Bush administration was because they believed that they were just a danger with weapons of mass destruction. The country was willing to support a war in the Middle East after 9/11, and the reality is that weapons of mass destruction were not found in Iraq, but the war dragged on for over a decade. So help them to understand those two wars happened at the same time, but not exactly over the same thing. And that is pretty much element D. I really hope you enjoyed this planning period with me. I hope I gave you some background knowledge. And look, I have lots of different resources to help teach this Middle Eastern standard. I have resources to help you understand the culture and the climate of the Middle East, because it's not all wars as the standard kind of suggests that it is. It's all about conflict, but help students also just understand that it is a very diverse region with lots of different people and religions and ethnicities, and a very rich history. So please check out the links below to see other resources. Do not forget to subscribe, because there's always videos coming out to help you be a better teacher. At Teach This Teacher, we believe every teacher needs teaching. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you on the next episode of Planning Period.